Hi again, everyone. Patrick Fingston here. I write the Illinoize political newsletter, which you can get every day at theillinoize.com, ILLINOIZE. Welcome back to the second week of our podcast for 2026, kind of reviving the weekly podcast after we put it on hiatus about 18 months ago when I jumped into daily radio and didn't have any time. And alas, we're trying it again and going to cover the legislative session and politics in 2026 in some long form fashion here on the podcast. Coming up on the show today, State Senator John Curran, the Senate Republican leader, Republican from Downers Grove, will join us. It was the first week that the Senate was in Springfield, so we'll get his take on some of the issues that have been in the news in recent weeks and months, and some of the things we expect to see under the Statehouse dome this week. Also a conversation we did for radio earlier in the week that I thought was fascinating, so decided to put it in the podcast this week. It's with Steve Brown, the former spokesman for then House Speaker Michael Madigan. Brown was never really connected to any of the criminal investigation, which as someone who was a fixture next to the former speaker when the legislature was in session, when Madigan was in Springfield, it raised some eyebrows. So we had a chance to ask Steve some of the base questions. What did you know? When did you know it? What were you involved in? Who did you talk to? That sort of thing. I found the conversation fascinating. One of those, your mileage may vary and you can believe what you want to believe out of it, but he hasn't really had a chance to sit down and answer some of these questions. So we thought it was an important opportunity to talk to him about that. So both of those will be coming up. First, though, a couple of things that the governor said this week. I want to start with a hint at what we're going to see in his legislative agenda for 2026. Remember, he and Speaker Welch and Senate President Harmon had a push at the end of last year to regulate the homeowners insurance industry, which sparked some pushback from State Farm and Allstate, some of these other Illinois-based insurance companies. The governor was in Bloomington Normal this week and was asked about that push last year and if it's something he's going to revive this year. And it certainly sounds like this is going to be something on Governor Pritzker's 2026 agenda.
What is of deep concern to everybody in Illinois, including people who live in Bloomington and Normal and all throughout central Illinois, not to mention everywhere else, is the idea that your homeowner's insurance is going to go up in one single year, 27%, is a bit outrageous. And so the reaction that I have, and I think that many members of the General Assembly have, is that that's not fair, that we ought to have more transparency from our insurance companies, especially when they're coming to ask for such an enormous increase and hike in insurance premiums from their customers. So, yes, I'm in favor of us making sure that we get the transparency that we should have and have the ability to discuss with the insurance company why their rates are so high. They've been unwilling to provide the data, the information that's necessary for us to take a look and make determinations about whether that's fair or not. And so that's what we're demanding by virtue of the legislation that was introduced. And I believe there will be, once again, legislation introduced. Whether it'll look exactly the same or not, I'm not sure. We're still talking about it, but it is absolutely true that insurance companies in Illinois need to be straightforward and transparent with their customers here in Illinois.
Just to follow up, that's reassuring to policyholders, but what about employees? You know, insurance is the largest employer in Bloomington Normal.
It is, and we have the best environment in the entire country for insurance companies, and we will continue to, even if we pass the bill. This will be the best place for an insurance company to locate themselves. As you've seen, we've been highly successful at building that industry here. We want to do nothing that will disturb that fact. And so this bill doesn't do that. All this bill does is really demand transparency and give the department the ability to opine and to work with the insurance company about what those rate increases really ought to be.
So that's Governor Pritzker earlier this week in Bloomington Normal on what appears to be one of the top legislative items that he wants to address this year that involves homeowners insurance. It was a push that fell just a few votes short in the House during veto session. So it'll be interesting to see how they approach that as we get toward veto session or through veto session last fall into the spring legislative session. I mentioned the governor also addressed the Bears. I wanted to share those comments.
Always said that that building a stadium is, from my perspective, about doing what's best for the taxpayers. This is a private business. We help private businesses all the time in the state. And I want to help if it's with infrastructure, as we do with other private businesses. That's absolutely a way we could do that. But as I've said, and the Bears have heard this, that we're not going to build a stadium for the Chicago Bears. But again, they're a private business. We have offered to do a number of things, still talking, as we always do with the Bears, about how best to meet their needs. But I want what's best for the taxpayers in the end, and we're going to make sure that we do the best that we can for the Bears, but most of all, that we're not wasting taxpayer money. Sorry, say it again. What about April? Yep. Sorry. Has something been put on the table? Yeah, there have been ongoing discussions with the Bears about the infrastructure. They just recently told us what their infrastructure needs are. And then the question is, how can the state meet those infrastructure needs? One thing I'm optimistic about in this regard is some of the infrastructure needs that the Bears are identifying as their needs are actually needs of the area around Arlington Heights. That those were projects that we were going to build at one point or another in the Rebuild Illinois capital plan. And so some of the what people are identifying as the Bears' needs, the Bears are identifying as their needs, are actually needs that would exist whether the Bears went to Arlington Heights or not. So I think that gives me some optimism that really there is a package that could be put together that would help with infrastructure. It also requires, though, that local governments understand that when businesses are thinking about moving to their area, that they expect to be able to do something about property taxes for some period of time. That's not something the state controls. That is something that local governments control. And so I would hope that those discussions have been ongoing by the Bears with local government.
So that's interesting, at least, that the governor is a couple of different buckets here, right? There's the infrastructure bucket, which the Bears ask is about $1 billion, $900 million, $1 billion in that Arlington Heights area. And the governor has never ruled any of that out, right? He ruled out the $1.5 billion that the Bears wanted at the original lakefront site and kind of said that's a non-starter. But in the Arlington Park site, I think that they're open to that. The second issue of wanting the state to pay to build the facility, that's never really been on the table. I think the Bears knew from the start that wasn't on the table. Public polling, there was a recent poll from WGN that showed that it's not something the public supports. And the Bears have said they'll pay for the stadium themselves. The real trick here is going to be property taxes, right? There are a couple of studies out there, a white paper out there from our friend Mark Batnick, former state representative, that shows that the property tax bill for that development would be something to the tune of $210 million. The SoFi Stadium in LA is the next highest, and it's about $8 million. Right, so that would have to be addressed. That's why you keep hearing about this mega development project bill at the Statehouse, and that's where things get tricky, because then you're asking Chicago Democratic legislators to give the Bears a tax break to allow them to leave the city of Chicago, and that's where you run into some really political hot water. All right, much more on this throughout the spring, I'm sure. Let's get to our conversation with Senate Republican leader John Curran. All right, it is a pleasure to welcome the Republican leader in the state Senate, John Curran, to the show. As the Senate came back to Springfield this week, didn't do much of anything, canceled the Thursday session. We don't expect a lot of things to happen early on in a session anyway, but even less than normal in the first week of the legislative session. But we kind of wanted to look forward and talk about what to expect this spring and how Republicans plan to play a role in those things. Senator, thanks so much for taking some time.
Patrick, very nice to be with you.
So let's look back before we look forward. last year at the end of the veto session was the passage of kind of the hastily constructed last minute transit bill. And I don't think there was anyone, Republican or Democrat, that would argue that transit didn't need some sort of assistance, some sort of reform, considering what a mess the CTA is with the dollars that have dried up. But the way that they ended up funding this, and I've been specifically outspoken on the $400 million in downstate road and bridge money that which I've called literal highway robbery, and the toll increase as a suburbanite, you certainly you and your constituents would know the toll increase that literally nobody asked for. I guess I'll give you the chance first to just tell me your thoughts on what we saw out of that legislation.
Patrick, legislation that was bad for the suburbs, bad for downstate. Our caucus is mostly a downstate caucus, and just the diversion of road funds from downstate roads, which are in great need of current and future improvement, is a big step backwards. I would tell you, me representing a suburban district, the biggest thing I wanted to see in it was protection from suburban taxpayers from being on the hook for the CTA's large unfunded pension liability. That's something we've been focused on from day one, and that's not there. So this was not good for the suburbs, and it could get a whole lot worse. Metra, Pace, their pension liabilities are manageable. The CTA, we allowed Chicago to run their transit system all these decades, and we allowed them to underfund their pensions all these decades. And now we're looking at a situation where I think you're going to see some of those pension costs shift to the suburbs. Obviously transit needed to be addressed, but how it was addressed, not putting the reforms in place first, put the new board in place first, and then let them come and let us know what they needed to run an efficient transit system. Instead, we just, there really aren't any reforms. It's just a new name to an oversight board. They're going to have new board members, presumably. Some may be reappointed. And we're just pushing dollars that way without really any structural reforms in place. It's not good public policy making.
It seemed interesting to me, and again, I don't think you can have people pay $25 per bus ride on the CTA, right? That's not realistic. It's still a public service, for lack of a better term, in terms of what CTA provides, what these mass transit systems provide. But it seemed to make no sense to me that they froze fares for, I forget, however couple of many years it was, when wouldn't it make sense to ask people who use the transit system? I mean, they're asking suburbanites to pay more for tolls, which won't actually go to transit anyway, but they're asking people to pay more for a sales tax eventually, when the RTA board will basically be strong-armed into increasing the sales tax. Why not have the people who use the trains and the buses pay more for it?
That should have been part of the equation. And Metra and Pace have been better about fare increases over time than the CTA. The CTA had 2 fare increases, I want to say, in the past. It was something close to 20 years. Not keeping pace.
And not since the pandemic, right? Before, like, right. 2017 or 2018
was the last one. Yeah. Metra and Pace have been, somewhat keeping pace with that, which is why they were in better funded positions. And the fiscal cliff was really when the CTA was going to be run out of money. And that was predictive of, and it's that mismanagement coming from, Brandon Johnson in Chicago that really drove this narrative. I think the sales tax increase, look, the footprint, no one wants to pay for anything. It should be a blend of, and mass transit is an incredible economic engine for the suburbs, the city of Chicago, Collier counties. Incredibly important. People need to be able to get to work and get to work in an efficient manner. We just cannot put everyone on the roadway. So when you're talking about like a sales tax increase, things of that nature, no one likes it, but the money's got to come from somewhere. It was constrained to the footprint of the mass transit system. Our caucus position was any sort of sales tax should not be statewide. It should not, there should not be a sales tax on downstate to pay for mass transit in the city of Chicago and the Collier counties. Obviously, the fund sweep was what replaced that. But fare increases, in paying a market rate for the service you're being provided should have been part of the discussions. It needs to be part of the discussions going forward.
Another major issue that came up during veto session was energy. I was a little salty by the end of it when I had a high-ranking House Democrat on my radio show who basically said, who came on and lied through his teeth and said that this is going to lower people's energy bills when it's not going to do anything to address spikes that we saw last summer. The spikes we're probably going to see next summer. You live in the ComEd territory, the Ameren territory felt it too. And in the end, we probably see these bills go up because of the new line item they're allowing these energy companies to add for battery storage schemes. I instead of criticizing what they did, which we can simply do all day, right? What can we do in 2026 to provide people with some relief on their energy bills? Because it was a shocker to people of all income levels, of all home sizes, all across the state. So how do we address it in 2026?
Yeah, we have to change our policy focus, Patrick. We actually in Illinois do not have an increase presently in demand. Demand is, demand over time had been trending down. Demand in Illinois has been flat. So we don't see the decline that we've historically had, but we don't have an increase. We're knocking generation off the grid. And that's what's driving up prices. So the attack on coal has knocked generation off the grid, and the attack on natural gas. And let's talk about that. Natural gas is abundantly cleaner than coal. And if we're going to stabilize prices, we're going to need more generation on the grid. And that is turning more strongly into natural gas. And stop knocking it off. And natural gas, along with nuclear, are the two forms of energy that are well positioned to deal with spikes. So the General Assembly needs to change its policy arc because the Democrats, in particular, have taken us in a direction that is knocking generation off the grid. And when you have these artificial dates out there, when you're going to close down plants, no one's going to invest in those plants, and oftentimes they go offline even earlier. So that arc has to change. These fabricated dates out in the future. We should actually let the market determine when those dates are, based upon improvements in new technology in generating energy. We cannot dictate that as policymakers. We're upsetting the market.
Yeah, it seems that there's been a trend. The Republican views seem to always be all of the above. I think I used that phrase a million times in Rodney Davis's campaign 14 years ago. But now it seems that Republicans are pushing against some of the renewable energy, things like wind, like solar. I don't think anyone in the world thinks that those things can make up for baseload generation that we need that comes from nuclear and coal and natural gas. But why do you think there's been a change of heart or a shift in focus from your party in recent years related to renewable energy?
I think the shift in focus comes from the fact that the thumb is being put on the scale with the subsidies being driven towards renewables to try to prop that industry up rather than let it grow in its natural course. again, disrupting the market. And those subsidies are coming from ratepayers, and it is a part of why we have higher energy bills. There's a whole nother argument on usurping local control around siting and zoning. That is a very big discussion, in my caucus. But, I'm not against wind. I'm not against solar. It should be a part of the portfolio. But the subsidies that are costing ratepayers significantly month over month, trying to advance those industries before the technology quite is there. Again, battery storage is another example of that. That's going to be extremely expensive for Illinois ratepayers, and I would say dubious on that this is actually going to work and bring down energy bills.
All right, so let's bring our focus to under the dome for this spring, as things warm up, which probably won't be until after the primary, because as you well know, nothing gets done in election years until before the primary, and most years nothing gets done until May these days anyway. But we're facing a $2+ billion budget deficit square in the face, based on revenue estimates from the end of last year. I think Hogfa said some state revenues have been better than expected. So I don't know if that number is exactly that today. But there are smarter people than me out there, and there are a lot of smarter people than me out there, but at least on the issue of the economy that fear that the bottom is about to fall out of the economy at any time. It feels like, and I'm interested in your perspective of we are in a very precarious position in state finances, because the last couple of years they've balanced the budget with baling wire and duct tape. There's a farm kid reference for you. And it seems like there are limited abilities for them to go back to the same well and fish for those same fixes again. How nervous, how concerned are you about the state of the state's fiscal health as we head into the spring session?
It's going to be a tough budget year, no doubt. The recent trend has been, projections paint a very gloomy position on it, or picture of it, and then they seem to lighten up a bit as we get through the budget cycle. COGFA's most recent release on the first half revenues for the FY 2026 budget have been helpful. It's good to see that growth, I think, and I think that is a sign that the economy actually nationally is going well, and we're not going to see the bottom drop out of it. But Illinois has year over year just built-in systematic fiscal challenges, and there are going to be the federal dollars from COVID are gone. There are going to be no easy budgets projecting the next several years. So the arc of 40% increase in spending since Governor Pritzker has taken office in the budget, that has got to level out. We cannot continue on that sort of trajectory because, as you mentioned, as we turn to last year's budget was focused on the sin taxes, right, and trying to pull more revenue. At some point, you're going to kill those industries, and they're not going to be revenue generators at all if you keep going those routes. And we have definitely been tough on business, year over year with additional tax increases. So we need to grow. Illinois needs to become a pro-growth state. We're bottom 5 in the nation since this governor took office in GDP growth. That's where Illinois needs to focus and change. If we were just middle of the pack, we're not saying top 10 in the nation, but middle of the pack, we would have a very different budget outlook year over year. So ultimately, we need to put policies in place that improve that growth arc compared to our competitor states.
The state budget when J.B. Pritzker took office in FY19 was $39 billion. It's $55 billion this year. As I push Democrats on that, essentially I get a response from them that is, well, that's the cost of doing business, inflation, structural challenges, structural cost increases, EBF for schools goes up every year. The pension payment goes up every year. That these are things that are just kind of baked in, and that it's a structural deficit and not necessarily something of their doing. Do you disagree with that?
I do, to a point. I mean, pensions is an inherited structural deficit, so they are right about that. There's no others. Well, I want to say, I can't remember which East Coast state it is, but there's really only one other state or two that are dealing with that type of structural deficit in their state budgets on pensions. So we are unique in that regards. But healthcare, that is not an inherited structural deficit. This governor and the Democrats in the majority chose to have, expansive Medicaid programs that, quite frankly, we could not afford. We could not afford going out into the future, and we now see them starting to constrain those and claw those back. Those types of dollars and spending those types of dollars just hurt our ability to manage this budget year over year. So I would say healthcare, education has been another one. We have the EBF funding formula in place. It has been working downstate. It has been working in the city in some of the less property rich areas of the state. But, so that is something that we're going to be able to continue to have to bake into future budgets. But we also have to look at, and it's general, but we see this going at the federal level. We have to look for waste. We have to look for and continue to audit, make sure everyone that's on Medicaid rolls is there appropriately, make sure people are not abusing the system. So this is something that Illinois has not done well, and that is managing the day in and day out implementation of the budget.
There is a group of progressives in the legislature that wants another bite at the apple of the graduated income tax, the progressive income tax. It failed in 2020, even after the governor put $60 million of his own money into it. And I think he probably got the message that this isn't something voters want right now. But there continues to be a push. From a Republican perspective, well, I know you oppose it. What's the argument against letting voters have a say, especially when you're a supporter of the Fair Maps amendment that would be on the ballot that would give voters a say in how we change maps? Why not give voters a say in how we handle taxes?
Well, first I would tell you I have refiled our resolution opposing progressive income tax. The voters have had a say. How many times are we going to go to the voters with that question? The voters had a say, and they told us no. So we need to respect the will of the voters. They have spoken, and move on from that. I would also note that if you think about the last several budget cycles and what we have seen play out with the demand for more and more spending on the Democratic side, if that had passed, it would be those rates getting tweaked up year over year is what would have played out. There's a reason that they didn't want to put rates in the proposed constitutional amendment or put any constraint on those progressive rates in the constitutional amendment. We would have seen that play out. We would be up higher than a $55 billion budget year over year right now if they had that authority. I don't think we've seen anything from the majority Democrats here that would make me comfortable in trusting them with that authority to manipulate income tax rates and corporate tax rates on a year in and year out basis at budget time.
All right, let me get you out of here on this. The Bears continue to be a big story, not only on the field, which we have to separate our fandom from the public policy part of this, but the stadium issue isn't going away now that they're having these flirtations with Indiana. I hear the governor over there is going to back up a Brinks truck, and that this may or may not be a bluff from the Bears. That seems like a really bad PR move. But from a public policy move, is the governor right when he says the public doesn't want us to build sports stadiums, especially when we're still sitting on $500 million of debt from the 2002 renovation? We're happy to help with infrastructure. We can work on something for taxes, but we're not going to bankrupt the local schools. Is his perspective right here? Because it seems sort of in line with what the public wants.
The governor is, this is an area I do agree with the governor. If the infrastructure is something that we would, we should be obligated. If you're going to have a major economic development that's going to be a major driver of, economic improvement in an area, having the infrastructure around that to support that is the role of government. In our state, that has happened time and time again. But the public does not want to see us putting tax dollars into building a stadium. Property taxes are one of the biggest barriers to continue to economic investment in the state of Illinois. So I certainly understand the Bears wanting to have property tax certainty of some scale before they invest the billions of dollars in that Arlington site, and increase economic activity in that area tremendously, which is going to have a broader public benefit. Local government, having a say in that is incredibly important. We are big believers in local control. So, I agree with the governor that we don't want to put tax dollars directly into building a stadium. And the fact that he's out there saying infrastructure is the appropriate role for us to support a major economic development. But how, the governor's going to have to, I think, lean into this a little more if something's going to happen here. Because it seems to me that it's not the governor, it's the Chicago legislators that are constraining this discussion and keeping it from going forward. And so I think that's where the governor needs to give a push, because we should have a broader discussion on this, hopefully in the near future.
Senate Republican leader John Curran. You'll notice we didn't have a chance to talk politics in this visit. He's at the Statehouse, so we don't want to cause any ethical issues around here. It is Illinois, of course, but hopefully we'll be able to do that. I know you guys have some big races this fall, so hopefully we can do that later on in the year. But leader, thanks for taking some time, and wish you the best this spring.
Thank you, Patrick. Nice to be with you.
All right, thanks to Leader Curran for his time on the first week of the legislative session for the Senate. At least the House comes back to Springfield next week. I want to turn to a conversation that I wasn't planning to put in the podcast this week, but I found it fascinating when we taped it for radio this week. So I wanted to go ahead and put it in the program this week. It's an interview we taped earlier this week with Steve Brown, the longtime spokesman for former House Speaker Michael Madigan. This is kind of a conversation he and I have been talking about doing for months. Sort of the what did you know, when did you know it, what did you see conversation, and I thought his answers were fascinating. Just know as you watch this, if you're watching this on YouTube, it's on our WMAY branded stuff. So don't be surprised when that pops up. And it was never really meant for a video feed. So it's kind of a two-shot the whole way. So please, don't have any judgment on the quality of the broadcast there, because we think the conversation is one that's worth listening to. So let's get to Steve Brown. It is our pleasure to welcome to the program this afternoon Steve Brown, who you all may know is a longtime spokesman to former House Speaker Mike Madigan. We have promised you this conversation for months that Steve had agreed to, and we were just trying to find the right time to sit down and kind of talk through the Madigan case, his history, what he knew, what he didn't, and that sort of thing. I think we last talked to you, Steve, at the State Fair. So I appreciate you taking some time with us this afternoon. Hope everything's going well.
Things are. It's a little chilly here in Washington, Illinois, but other than that, it's as good as can be expected.
All right. So for those who are listening that aren't Statehouse disciples or people who camp out under the dome, what's your history at the Statehouse, and when did you get involved in journalism? I guess, of course, would be where it started, and when did you move into politics?
Yeah, in journalism was 1971. I graduated from SIU Carbondale, went to work for the Daily Herald papers in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. In mid 70s, became their political editor. The guy who had that job moved on to work for Dan Walker. 76-ish, I think I started covering the legislature, and the paper figured out that it might be cheaper to move me to Springfield than pay my travel expenses back and forth when the legislature was in session. So I opened their first full-time bureau in the 70s, and it lasted until about 79. And then I got recruited to go to work for Jane Byrd after she was elected mayor of Chicago. That ended in 83 when Harold Washington won the 83 election. And I had met Mike Madigan along the way. He offered me a position to come aboard to deal with the media. And I didn't know at the time that the person who had been doing press for the majority Democratic leader's office at the time was leaving. And then I ended up as the primary spokesman for Madigan.
And that was when? 83?
83, yeah.
83, okay, when he became speaker.
Right.
So I think there, and Steve, that I come from Republican politics. So,
yeah,
so
I've heard that. I've heard that.
You've heard that. We maybe not so much these days, but we had this perception of Madigan as the boogeyman, the corrupt inside dealer, the kind of belief that every Republican just knew he was a criminal, even though, we didn't have the proof of it at the time. Before we get into the legal stuff, what was it about Madigan that made him such an enigma in that sense that people just had this feeling that there had to be something going on there?
Well, I think in the beginning, it depends on when you approached it, the whole thing from the timeline. In the beginning, he was pretty open and accessible to the media, especially, during the session. There would be nearly daily availabilities as we were coming on or off the floor with the press. That wound down over time. One was part of utilization. One was kind of a frustration with the focus of what was going on. And overall, though, he was a relatively closed-mouth person. He was not someone who spoke in exaggeration or some of the kind of bombastic terminology you hear from some people in public life. And that might have brought all that about. And then it was always good for somebody to have a boogeyman to explain, why they were failing. And that's probably where the Republicans went most of the time.
When did you meet Mike McLean?
Oh, I met Mike McLean when he was still a member. This was when the Democrats were in a minority. They were in a majority. And he was a state rep from Quincy, kind of a colorful figure. Father had been a rep. I think his father actually passed away on the floor of the House. And that's how Mike came into be. He was a lawyer in the Quincy area. And a thoughtful guy. He left the legislature and developed a skill as a lobbyist. He did a good job selling himself as a downstater who could relate to some of the Chicago interests, especially the business guys, the retail merchants, the Manufacturers Association, and others. And that gave him a little bit different cachet, if you will, in the lobbying community.
Steve Brown joins us. He was a spokesman for former House Speaker Michael Madigan for many years, and wanted to kind of walk through some of the history here and the the investigations and the trial itself, and some of what Steve saw and experienced and may have played a role in. We were talking about McLean. He was essentially a figure who was always in at least the shadows of what the speaker was doing when he was a lobbyist. I think everyone recognized that he was, always sitting on a bench outside of 300, right? He was kind of always around. Folks know that if somebody was at dinner with the speaker at Saputo's, it was either you or Mike McLean, or maybe both. McLean talked as we heard these wiretaps over the years now, about assignments. Did you know, as someone who was sort of in that inner circle, did you know what McLean was tasked with, what these quote unquote assignments were?
I'm not sure I ever used that term. I mean, I think there were projects that he took on, efforts he took on, maybe asked, maybe not. I don't know that part. And then he always liked to portray himself as someone who was very close to Mike Madigan. And I think that was part of a marketing effort, if you will. And there were probably a number of other people along the way who were pretty close to Mike Madigan. I'm not sure I would rate McLean as the number one on that list, how you would rank those people. But I think Mike made good use of that tie in terms of promoting his lobbying business.
Did you ever find it odd that the speaker never had a cell phone, that the speaker always worked through intermediaries, that he never had never sent an email? Did you ever, especially as time went on? I mean, right? It's different in 1986, but as time went on, did you find it strange that, I mean, that's sort of like mob boss thing, that they work through someone else. Did you ever find it strange?
Yeah, I'm never sure I saw it as that orchestrated or organized. I think he didn't have a cell phone.
He was the most organized guy in the world.
Well, I know, but I don't think that that image was what he necessarily planned to depict. Okay, I think he didn't carry a cell phone because he spent many hours a day, 7 days a week, most of the time, in an office by a phone, where he could make a call, somebody could call him. And I think when he wanted to leave that office or be home or do a few things outside the world of politics and government, he wanted to be phone free. The problem with cell phones, Patrick, as you might know, is they tend to ring, you'd be inclined to answer them, or at least you'd be interrupted to see who it was who was calling. And I didn't surprise me. He understood how to use cell phones. I didn't find, the mystique that different people have made over that whole piece of the puzzle. It always I kind of chuckled at it, if you will. Okay.
As someone
in terms of email, he was like I was a creature of the Royal Manual typewriter when I was in journalism. I was still doing that when I got out of college. And so it was technology that he had never experienced in school, never experienced in his early professional life. And so that part didn't surprise me very much.
As someone who was changing a diaper when he got a call from a former lawmaker last night, I can understand the idea of maybe not having cell phones around quite as much, but
right.
I totally understand in that.
Yeah.
regard.
Okay. So I mean, it's been made into a great kind of mystery. This was part of the, what would the word be? The enigma of Mike Madigan. I'm not sure it was really all that.
Did you ever have a conversation, whether it was with McLean or Mapes or the speaker himself, in which there was a conversation or an ask for somebody for something, a job, a recommendation, something for a bill, something for a campaign donation. I'll get into the specifics of like the ComEd stuff here in a second, but just in general, were you ever in a room where you heard conversations or were you part of any conversations where someone said, we need to ask for XYZ in return for this?
I'd have to say no. And in fact, I'm more familiar with conversations where it was apparent that people were offering different things in support for a particular bill or opposition to a particular bill. I know I made a point of, because I've done some public relations work in addition to working for the legislature, because I did my legislative work under a personal service contract, so I wasn't a full-time state employee. With a specific kind of clause in it that said, don't interpret this work that will get you a special treatment relationship with any other entity that I do work for. And that's how I designed my code of ethics in terms of those things. But I'm not familiar with it. I know people who offered to hire the Madigan law firm to do different things, whether it was tax matters or other matters, that they specifically stayed away from because they knew that party had an interest in a legislative matter or a state matter.
But then you fast forward to the ComEd issue, the FIJA issue, in that 2016, 2017 range that started to become a part of the criminal case.
Right.
There are wiretaps in which McLean is involved, in which it at least appears that there's direction from the speaker that he wants jobs or McPeer appointments or XYZ from ComEd. Board appointments, Juan Ochoa, being one of those. I'm seeing a disconnect here from you saying I never heard anything like that, but we had McLean and at least implicitly Madigan on these tapes that we're looking for something.
Yeah, I'm not sure I ever saw that. From what at the trial, I don't know that I saw daily transcripts that would say I've seen every word that was said in that courtroom. But I'm not certain I've ever seen any examples of where Madigan had said to McLean or to anyone else, I won't do X for your bill until you hire somebody or you consider this appointment or whatever the case might be. Did they make requests? Sure. Do the utilities routinely hire just about anybody that somebody suggests they hire? You and I both know countless numbers of people. We can go down the list and I can give you who they worked with in both parties, in both chambers, in the executive branch. And at no point did I ever see anything said by Madigan that if you don't do this appointment or this hire, your bill's not going to happen. Now, in the case of the ComEd situation, I think the perspective, the time frame of that whole thing really was set up by the government to make it portray that these big deals happen for ComEd, in a certain period of time. And if you'd gone back about, 2 years or so prior, was the whole legislative session. There was a pitched battle between Madigan, Emil Jones, Governor Blagojevich, and ComEd to end something called the reverse auction, which had caused skyrocketing rate increases that ended up with a legislative solution that saw the creation of the renewable portfolio for energy, the power authority that was involved in procurement, a $1 billion, this goes back to about 7, 8 or 9, I forget the year, a $1 billion refund to ComEd and Ameren customers. So I think ComEd got a pretty good spanking, if you will, in that whole occasion. Perhaps their attitude towards Madigan House Democrats changed a little bit.
Fast forward a little bit here to when Madigan was indicted in 2022. Were you ever interviewed by the FBI as part of this investigation?
I was not, which always surprised me, frankly, because I had been, as it turned out, some of the meetings that were discussed in some of the trials, whether it was the Madigan trial, the ComEd trial, Tim Mapes' trial, I was in some of those meetings.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I don't know whether the government thought I might not be a good witness for them or why they ignored me. I've never, knock on wood, because it probably saved me tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees just to go through that process, right? Which was money I didn't have to spend. I was prepared. I had people that I had spoken to about representation, but I didn't have to spend it.
Did you testify before the grand jury?
No.
There has long been a rumor out there that someone from the inside may have been a leaker or a source or a confidential informant. Did you ever make any sort of a deal with the feds?
I did not. I did not. That's been said of me, because in question, why was I never called? Why was I never called? I don't know. But had I been called, I would have not had knowledge of some things when it were elements of that whole process. Had I known about some of those elements of the process, I probably would have done my best to change the way they happened. Pardon me. And so that's it. And I probably had a lot of examples of situations, as I mentioned earlier, where Madigan, on his own behalf, on behalf of his law firm, turned things away, which probably would have spoiled the image.
And Steve, I think I have a lot of respect for you, and you and I have worked together since I was a reporter starting back in 2005. So we go back a ways, but I don't think it's unfair for people who know you or have dealt with you and know the kind of smart, engaged, intuitive guy that you are, to say that it's a little suspect that this guy who was in the Statehouse for 40 years, that was one of Madigan's ride or dies, to use one of the kids' terms, never saw anything, never saw any smoke, never saw anything that made his spidey senses tingle and say, something isn't right here. You mean for us to honestly believe that there was never anything that made you go, this doesn't seem right?
Of the things I knew about, no. Now, I'm trying to think of a good example that might help clarify this. So let's start with the lobbyists who maybe were asked to put together some money to help Kevin Quinn, who had worked in the Madigan district office for a long time, probably back to his high school days, who had been fired over connection
sexual
with
harassment of Atlanta Hampton and that sort of thing.
And so I didn't know that effort was afoot. Okay. I had no knowledge of it. Had I heard about it, I probably would have said whoever was orchestrating that, which I think was McLean, there may be better ways to find Kevin some money. He had a difficult situation. He was going through a contentious divorce. Pardon me. And so rather than just turn to a bunch of lobbyists, who for the most part were former Madigan staffers, many of whom I think had contracts with ComEd or AT&T or other places, other utilities, to deal with that. But it happened without my knowledge. Okay. And so if people don't want to believe it, so be it, Patrick. I don't know that there's a benefit to me by saying I have not, was not questioned, was not called before a grand jury. And whether anybody scrutinized me before that decision was made, I don't know. but that's the way it was. It was surprising. I can admit that.
We knew that there was some sort of investigation happening for years leading up to that indictment, right? I think people knew that there was some smoke around McLean, at least. When the indictment dropped in 2022, or between that and the trial, or however you want to frame this, I'll allow you to expound however you want. What did Madigan tell you about it? What did you believe what he said, and how did you believe this was being approached by the feds?
Well, I think I knew about the whole. What I knew about it started with, I was told in part by Madigan, including Madigan, that there had been an approach by the FBI to the homes of McLean and several others. So the people that the former alderman in the 23rd Ward, a couple other places like that, that the FBI had gone there to secure things. And that was really the first I think I might have heard about it. The next thing that I heard about when I read in the newspaper was that Danny Solis, former alderman in Chicago, had been working as a mole for the FBI and had meetings with some people. I don't think there was an immediate disclosure that one of those meetings started with a meeting that a developer with Solis had in Madigan's law office. But there was some reporting on that happened. And the only question I had was how many times did those meetings occur with Solis? And I was told a few. So that obviously more than one. The Solis had brought developers in to the Madigan law firm. And I don't think much more than that was said, frankly.
You and I spoke often during the trial, and I think those conversations were off the record, so I won't share those. But I do want to give you an opportunity to at least say what you want about how you felt about the trial itself, and how Madigan defended himself, put himself on the stand, which a lot of people were surprised that he. For someone who was so tight-lipped in his time in public service, how did you view the trial?
Well, I thought the whole process, and it was multiple trials, if you will, showed kind of an extreme effort to bring charges against somebody who, like you said in the beginning of this conversation, people thought, oh, he must be somehow corrupt, okay? And I think there were anecdotal urban legends that some of the personnel in the U.S. Attorney's Office kind of entered that office with the belief that everybody in elected public life was corrupt. That was a given in their books. I've heard that from lawyers who in some cases mentored people in that prosecution team, okay? And so I thought that was kind of borne out as we went along. I thought to have two moles, one of whom worked nearly a decade on these issues, to come up with not a whole lot, as I saw. I never saw testimony in the trial or ever evidence entered that suggested that Madigan ever said to Solis, for example, if I don't get the legal business, I want you to kill some zoning project. So those are the kind of things I think that then now open the door going forward that complicate what's going to ultimately happen. So the case is under appeal to the Seventh Circuit. The Seventh Circuit has already been reversed in similar cases. The Portage mayor, I think his name is Schneider, is one of them that hangs out there. We'll see how it all is resolved. And in how the appellate court resolves the contradictory findings in some of these trials. I mean, for example, the reporting yesterday about Ann Palmaggiore reporting to prison reminded me of the situation that the bribery charges in that case were, I think, dismissed. And so if the bribery charges are dismissed, if the bribers didn't bribe, then I wonder how the records that were kept relate, how it spills over to the other cases. And I'm not a lawyer. I'm not talked to the lawyers about how this will play out, but it's kind of interesting.
When was the last time you spoke to former Speaker Madigan before he went to prison, since he's been to prison, and what can you divulge about what you all talked about?
Yeah, we spoke a couple of days in the week before he reported, and I just expressed I was disappointed that the appeal bond issue didn't go his way. I thought it made sense the way the Bureau of Prisons operates that I've heard about in recent years. Didn't decide to leave him at home with his wife, whose health has not been good. Pardon me again. And so I called to basically say I was sorry to hear that it happened. I offered to come to Chicago, maybe have dinner. He and I would have dinner maybe once a month, maybe more, over the course of all this whole process. And I, got the information about how to write, how to send books. I've sent a couple of books. I've written a couple of letters. I've heard back. I think he is dealing with the circumstances he's faced with. I think he's in West Virginia. Hopefully the weather's a little milder there than here, but time will tell. Weather is weather everywhere we go.
This may be, I'll let you go on this, Steve. This may be the toughest question of all. Because again, I come from the other side politically, the people who made Madigan out to be, the second coming of Beelzebub. He is a convicted felon. He has this cloud around him, the political dynasty that crumbled so quickly in 2021. Do you believe Mike Madigan's a good man?
I still find him to be a very honorable person, because I know of examples where things that could have been corrupt acts, things he could have done to benefit himself or his law firm, or clients of the law firm, he turned away. I think that was best demonstrated, Patrick, if I digress a little bit, in that series. I think the Tribune glowingly called it Madigan Rules back in about 2010, where they had, I think, sometimes 6 or 8 reporters working day in and day out for months to find examples of him abusing that office, and they basically failed. I mean, that project was basically a failure in that regard. It was a very interesting set of circumstances with that group. So I still have, I see him as an honorable person. I think I have faith that the appellate process will work to resolve all this, and maybe a year or so from now we can have a similar conversation and there's a different outcome.
Steve Brown, longtime Madigan spokesman, Democratic operative. Steve, I appreciate, this I know wasn't easy at times, and I know it's a big part of your life over the last couple of years, and I appreciate that you've been willing. You agreed months ago to sit down and go through all the details of some of this stuff. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for having a frank conversation, and look forward to talking to you about politics next time and not so much this stuff.
Okay, Patrick, good luck with your show.
All right. Thanks to Steve Brown. Thanks to Senate Republican leader John Curran. Thank you for joining us, taking time out of your day to listen to what's going on around the state. What we're going to do is try and have long form, in-depth, challenging discussions with people in the legislature and statewide executive offices, campaigns, because it is campaign season nonetheless. So we're going to try and keep bringing you interesting content throughout the year. Drop me a note if you ever have any thoughts or suggestions or stuff you want covered. Patrick at the Illinoize, ILLINOIZE, theillinoise.com. Would love to hear from you. Thanks so much for taking time. Have a great week. We'll talk to you next time on the Illinoize Podcast.